Okay, so section 1.1, hopefully this is not going to be too challenging for you. It's just a review of functions. Basically, what is the basics of functions? So we're not even getting into anything too complicated from a mathematical standpoint. But there is something that I'd like to point out because I see some students still struggling with this at the end of the course. And it's not a good sign because it's kind of the basics of business and economics and stuff, which most of you are in some type of major that involves those things. So this is definitely an idea that you want to have down. So I'm using Desmos that I showed you in the previous video. I'm going to show you how to use it, and I'm going to illustrate some stuff on Desmos to give you an idea about these important concepts that are going to come up. And this is in the book as well. So if you look these up, you'll see the same notation, the same ideas, and you're going to need to know it because the way that you're given information in the different types of problems in the book, it totally varies. And so sometimes you're going to be given a cost function in a problem, and sometimes they're just going to give you enough information that you have to figure out the cost function, and you need to be able to do that. So in this class, whenever we see capital C of X, so that's our function at the top there, the one that we can see right now in red, that is a cost function. And your cost function is generally made up of two different parts. You have your fixed cost and you have your variable cost. So fixed costs are things that don't matter about how many units you produce. So these would be things like, say, the lease that you're using for your building, insurance that you pay for your building, things like that. The insurance company and the person who's charging you rent, they don't care if you've made 1 unit this month or if you've created 500 million units, and they don't care. They just want the rent paid, right? So your rent doesn't change. It's a fixed cost. So you can actually see this in the function. If we look at the constant in the function, the 2, that's fixed. Right? When we change our value for X, the 2 doesn't change. So it's fixed. The second term, the 0.2x, that is going to change depending on what X is. If we plug in 0 for X, that second term becomes 0. If we plug in 10 for X, that second term becomes 2. So that's the variable cost. These are the things that change depending on how many units you produce. So this could be things like materials that you use to produce your product. Right? The more units you produce, the more materials you have to buy. So your costs go up. It could be things like labor, right? The more you produce things, the more you're paying for people to put these things together. It's going to cost you more money. So you can always break down your cost function into thinking about it in terms of fixed cost, variable cost, and then you can actually see the fixed cost and variable cost in the expression for your function. Okay. Now you might go, what's that thing at the end? What's with the squiggly lines? And then it says X greater than 0. That's how I'm able to limit the graph. It's very important in business calculus or applied calculus to be able to limit your functions to the part you actually care about. In this case, it doesn't make sense to have X values that are negative, right? We're not going to produce -5 units this month. So we don't need that in there confusing things. So it's just a restriction that I can put on that function so that we can just narrow things down and make a nice pretty graph. Nice pretty graphs are easier to read, easier to understand. When you give them to someone else, they're going to understand them a lot faster. So it's a good idea to take a few extra seconds to make your graphs look nice. Okay, so whenever you see capital C of X in this class, that means cost. Okay, so if you're using Desmos, what you can do, I'm now going to turn off that first function by just clicking over here on the left. See how it's not graphing it anymore? And I go down to second one, click that. Now we have a new graph showing up. Okay, and we can see we've now restricted both ends of this function. So we see a starting point, we see an ending point. Makes sense because lowercase p of x is actually our price function. And this can be a little confusing because we're going to have two functions that we could call p of x. We have little lowercase p of x, which is going to be our price function. And then you'll see in a minute down below, we have capital P of x. That's our profit function. So you always have to keep these straight. Lowercase p will be price function in this course. Capital case P will be profit function. So you need to remember to keep the two separate. So our price function can be given in lots of different ways, right? So here's an example of one. That we've got it graphed there, and we can go ahead and take a look at that. All right, let's take a look at our revenue function. Revenue function is one where a lot of times problems in these courses, sometimes they're just going to give you a revenue function and say, here's your revenue function. Sometimes what they're going to give you is the information you need to figure out your revenue function. So always just think about, what is revenue? Revenue is the money that you bring in, right? Cost is the money that you're paying out to other people. Revenue is the money that's coming in to you. So how do you calculate revenue? It's actually very simple. People get bogged down in overthinking what a revenue function is. It's much simpler than that, right? Think about it in terms of a lemonade stand. Let's say you go out, you make a lemonade stand on the corner. How much money do you have at the end of the day? Well, you have the price that you charged for the lemonade times the number of lemonades that you sold. Right? Makes sense. If you charged $1 per lemonade and you sold 100 lemonades, you have $100 in revenue. You have $100 in cash that you brought in. That's how you calculate a revenue function. You take the price per unit times the number of units sold. Okay, so it's you'll see this in the book throughout the entire course. It's just X times lowercase p. Lowercase p is our price. X is almost always, most of the time, it's going to stand for the number of units produced. So X is the number of units produced, P is the price, X times P, that gives us our revenue, right? It's the number of lemonades we sold times the price of the lemonade. That's how much revenue we have, okay? So in this case, the one we're looking at, the price is 0.75. The number of units sold is X, so we can sit there and take a look at our function that tells us what our revenue is based on the number of units that we sell. Okay, this is the one that I especially see people stumble with. Even on the final exam, I'll see people mess up this revenue function. So make sure it's if you stop and think about it for a minute, it's actually a pretty basic idea. So make sure you understand this right away. You're going to save yourself a lot of missed points over the remainder of the semester, okay? And then, as I mentioned, we've got our profit function. And this is another one. Sometimes they're going to directly give you the profit function in the problem. Sometimes they're going to make you figure it out. Well, how do you calculate profit? Well, it's revenue, the amount of money that you're bringing in, minus cost, the amount of money going out. That's profit. That's how much you're left with. So we use capital P of X for the profit function. It's just your revenue minus your cost. So you literally, if you're coming up with an expression for it, you literally write out your revenue and then you subtract off your cost, and then you're going to simplify things down, and what you're left with is your profit function. Okay? So you definitely want to wrap your brain around those. They're going to come up, I think, probably every single section of this book. Is going to have problems where these functions come up, and you want to be familiar with how to figure them out, how to use them, and be able to recognize that notation when you see a capital R of X. You go, oh, that's a revenue function, right? This kind of stuff. So that's the main thing to keep. That's one of the big takeaways. Obviously, you need to know how functions work, so review all the math and make sure you can remember how to evaluate functions and all that kind of stuff. But this is a little bit newer material, what I just talked about, so make sure that you understand that.